find myself wishing that I wasn't doing those things, but at the same time, I feel like I have to, you know. And I don't think the solution is, well, then stop playing it wrong, you doofus.
Hello, we are Games by Design. I'm Nick Dunlap, and I'm joined by my brother Zach
Hello.
and our friend Aaron Bone.
Howdy, hey.
Our theme this week is open worlds. And we're just going to hop right on in. Zach, you wanted to talk about Breath of the Wild.
Breath of the Wild. I loved Breath of the Wild.
Me too. Good talk.
Good talk. Okay, so excuse me. I'm about to speak blasphemy about Breath of the Wild, and the Breath of the Wild gods are cursing me with a with a cough. So my thoughts on Breath of the Wild for today. I love that game. It was so good. I was like so hyped when I first heard about it. Like it was like I felt like I was being a kid again. Like honestly, like I hadn't been excited about a game like that in years. And it wouldn't be until Crusader Kings 3 was announced that I would be excited about a game like that again. So but there was so much. I think what I loved so much about it was so like wide open and so fun to explore, and like so there was a magic of discovering everything, and it was so real. And and along with that, I felt a very real desire to like see everything, and a very real conflict actually between following the very urgent story, urgent narratively, not mechanically, and then just messing around and trying out things and discovering stuff, which ultimately resulted in the story winning out, and I prioritized that instead of all the exploration I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I left, and then I put the game down, and I was like kind of disappointed. Like I still had a good time, but I was like, man, I kind of wish that I had done more exploring. But at the same time, I felt like I couldn't, because I felt like I physically could, you know, like I could go and continue to explore and mess around. I could put the story off and just do whatever, but all of it was leading to the end, and when I felt like I was ready to go to the end, it felt kind of I'm trying to say the word disingenuous without using the word disingenuous. But it felt
You said it twice.
It felt kind of, I know. Yeah. But I felt like I couldn't. It was like I don't know, I don't know. I talk about this a lot. I felt like I was kind of tricking myself, or whatever, but pretending that I wasn't ready to move on to the end or whatever. And like, you know, Breath of the Wild, like a lot of open world games, bizarrely has this hurry, we gotta get there, go do it now, kind of a thing, and which isn't like it's not mechanical, like I said, but that's the way it's presented to you, and they're like, hurry, we're running out of time. And I don't know why open world games do that. It bothers me sometimes because it stops me from feeling like I can comfortably explore the open world. Anyway, that's my thing though. Like I wanted to be the game. I wanted the game to be more about like exploring. I wanted the discovery to be at the forefront more. Since it was such a beautiful, evocative, mysterious, like detailed world with so many secrets and things like that. And I feel like Breath of the Wild, more than a lot of like other open world games, has like this, there actually is stuff to discover, you know, compared to like a lot of games where it's like feels really dry and empty and dead, and like even though it's trying very hard not to be. And then but I just felt like I couldn't, you know. So that's kind of my thought. I was curious about, you guys both played Breath of the Wild. I was wondering if you felt similarly disappointed in that particular thing, or do you have similar game experiences that kind of go along with this? What are you thinking?
I had a similar kind of experience where as soon as I was done with the story, I couldn't really touch it again. I couldn't go back and play. Like I tried a couple times. I was like, well, I finished. I should go explore more. And it's like, well, the story's over though. Like I saved it. I saved the day. I finished. The, for there is a story, and the story is over.
Yeah.
And so everything else just feels like there's not. It just feels like I'm pretending. It's like, oh, well, let's pretend the story's not over though, so I can keep playing around. And
Yeah.
and that wasn't a problem like at the beginning, when it wasn't like that, the whole way. Like there were times where I was like, oh, I need to explore. I want to explore. I need to. There's like this. I know if I explore, I can be more prepared for the story or the end of the game, or I can get good gear, or like there's this like feeling of preparation sometimes.
Right. That's
Not
like
all
the
of
whole
the time.
game.
Yeah, and so like it feels like you're kind of getting ready, and so like you can kind of justify, oh, I'll go fight some bad guys over here. I'll go explore. I'll go do some explore some shrines, and I'll go and
No.
I'll do whatever. But not. But there comes a point where you're kitted out. Like I've got all the best gear in the game, and I've got all of the strongs, and I've got all of the knowledge, and I'm like, all right, I know how to do this. There's still so much to explore. There's still so much I haven't seen, just because the world is so vast. But like I'm ready, and I can't really justify goofing off anymore. And so when that happened, I couldn't not go and finish the game. I finished, and then I did, and it was like, oh, there's still so much that I just never interacted with. So, yeah, kind of a similar experience, I guess.
I think it's a very real challenge for open world games. So I think, to have a good narrative, you need drama, and oftentimes that drama is fueled by a sense of urgency, or by a crisis, by something that you need to engage with, right? And yeah, to have that conflict of needing this engaging story, but also the freedom to do something else, to do all these other things. I think it's a difficult balance. And I think, just to some of its credit, Breath of the Wild does have a lot of smaller objectives that are kind of built into its exploration. It's like finding all the memories, or finding all the shrines, or unlocking the towers, exploring the world. That can kind of work, but I think in some ways, also the way that it tells its story kind of goes against how the game is designed as a whole. I think, it's and you notice this in the very first part of the level. And this episode doesn't need to be about let's dissect and analyze Breath of the Wild, but I think something interesting in its design, and its opening tutorial, is just it's this big open but limited area, and everything that you need for the rest of the game is in that area. And you could explore it, find it for yourself, or you can get a bit more direction to receive it. But there's a point where it kind of goes against that choices of you to find things out for yourself, and the game directing you, when it'll just stop you and say, hey, Link, go to this point. And then at that point, it kind of gives you a deluge of the basic story and what's going on. And I wonder if the game didn't give you the story all at once, didn't direct you to it from the beginning, and you kind of found pieces of it here and there as you explore, if that would have worked better. And I know it's a Zelda game, so it's like, oh, rescue Zelda, defeat Ganon. But if you could play around with Link having, this memory loss, and not knowing that that's a trope in a Zelda game, that he could, like, oh, I don't know, maybe you don't find out all the pieces of the puzzle till you're actually at Hyrule Castle. So like by the time you know the story, it's assumed that you've gotten to that point, and so you're not completely pushing it off. I don't know, and I think, yeah, just in general, I think it's a thing in open world games. I wouldn't say Zelda necessarily does worse than others, but that, yeah, it almost does force you to pretend sometimes. I know I was playing through a second time, and I was like deliberately going in directions not connected to the story, and just pretending Link was just totally dumb and oblivious to what was going on in the world. And it's like, I'm gonna go be a fisherman in Lurelin Village, and that's how I'm gonna live my life. And and I think if the game, if a game like maybe gives you that option again, like the if it's an open-ended world, open-ended exploration, everything you need, you make the choice, then I think the story being more scattered and organically fed to you from that exploration, I think could lend to that a bit better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that a game that does the open world really, 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 really well, in terms of integrating the story and the exploration of an open world game is The Outer Wilds.
Yes.
I don't know that I've ever seen a game handle the combination of story and open world exploration quite as well as that one. It just works. You know,
Uh,
to quote Todd, and like the because it's kind of like what you're saying, Aaron, like the story is scattered around the universe, and
Yeah.
and it's completely non-sequential. You can get it whenever you want to, whenever you get to it, whenever you stumble upon it, and then you start piecing it together through the exploration. And it's kind of like, I mean, try to play the Outer Wilds like you play a lot of open world games. It's like, okay, where's my objective? And it's like, go explore, man.
yeah.
And yeah, and so I love that. I love that so much. It works so well.
Yeah, it's willing to withhold so much from you from the get-go.
Yeah.
And like I I am there I was kind of disappointed that Breath of the Wild does this thing where, you wake up and you don't have any memory. And it's like, okay, we're setting up for a lot of discovery. Like, sure, it's a trope, amnesia, whatever, but like there's a reason. It's
Yeah,
fun.
that's
now
why
now
they
I
do
gotta
that.
yeah, now I gotta discover everything. I gotta learn everything. And then you wake up and the very first thing that happens is someone says, hey, you lost your memory. You need to save the world. Go talk to this person, or what, not, or you need to save the world. Wake up. And so you wake up and you walk out, and there's this old guy, and he's like, and he chats with you for a little bit, and like within the first hour, he's like, okay, well, here's all the backstory. Here's everything you missed. Um, he fills you
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
and he says,
Yeah.
now go fight the bad guy. Like, and you have, and now the amnesia is just totally been tossed aside. Like, it comes up for fun little plot moments later, like the memories, you seek out the memories and stuff. But like, there's no need to discover what your purpose is. There's no need to discover like what the main conflict is. It's all just laid out for you. Versus like versus Outer Wilds, where it's the other Wild game. It's much more out there, I guess. Yeah, Breath of the Wild and Outer Wilds. Someday we're gonna get Breath of the Outer Wilds, and it's gonna just be the
Oh gosh.
craziest
Zelda in space.
Yeah, it's gonna be
As
awesome.
if it's not enough with Outer Wilds and the Outer Worlds, right?
Yeah. And then we'll get the Outer Wild. Yeah. Anyways,
What was your thought though?
no, the thought was that like Outer Wilds just, it lets you discover what the conflict is. It lets you discover everything. The whole story is found through discovery. It doesn't really tell you. And Breath of the Wild, I feel like, had a really cool opportunity to do that. And I don't know exactly what they were trying for in the game. Maybe it was just they wanted to start things out a little bit differently. But I don't know that I can prescribe a solution. But like, I mean, there's another game that did it, and I didn't have the same problem. So
Yeah.
And to this day, Outer Wilds is one of my favorite stories in a game. Like, I think it's one of the most tight, consistent, interesting stories in a game, and it is told completely non-linearly up to like the player to figure out. And I think that's just such a feat for a game to accomplish both of those things.
Yeah.
yeah.
Another game I was thinking about, you were talking about originally with Breath of the Wild, where you're exploring, you're kind of doing your own thing, but eventually you have to follow the story, and that then dictates how you approach the game if you want to engage with the story, which we've talked about before. Something I was thinking of, I was playing Far Cry 3, and we've all played a little bit of that game, but the way that game is laid out is, there's a general story of like finding a way off this island, and then there's also these pirates that have taken your friends, and so you have to take out the pirate camps and find your friends and get all together and then find a way off the island. And it's kind of designed loosely that it's almost like the game doesn't want you to focus on the story too much, as I think a lot of open world games do. It's like, yeah, there's a story, but what we really want you to do is ignore the story and do like all this grindy stuff. But there's not a whole lot of reason story-wise to take out every single camp, or to find all these
Right.
secrets. But I had found a way to connect it where it's like, okay, because every time you take out a camp, it gives you a new fast travel point, it gives you a new gun locker, that you can restock. And so in my mind, it was like, okay, I have to go to this area. Here's all these camps around it. I will take out those camps so that I have, a base of operations nearby in the area, that I can then stack it. And like for the first half of the game, it's working really well. But then there's a point in the game where you don't the story doesn't want you to make your presence known to these areas. And then I had absolutely zero reason to engage with any of the camps. Because, with what I had been doing with how I'd been playing before, which I was like, oh, this is cool. I can do all this open world kind of completionist stuff while still feeling engaged with the story. And after that point, it's like, well, if he's really being undercover and he's not wanting them to know who he is, I don't think he'd be then blowing up a bunch of random camps to,
Right.
Yeah. And so there was that disconnect there. Once the story went in that direction, I felt like I couldn't explore as much. I couldn't. I mean, I did anyway because, again, like the game kind of doesn't want you to connect with the story as much, so it doesn't it wasn't like Zelda where it's like, oh, I have to rescue the princess. It's like, it's a good story, but whatever. But yeah, it was the story then made it so I didn't want to explore as much, or I couldn't do the same thing I was doing before. So it's an interesting balance.
Yeah. This kind of, man, this conflict, I think, between story and open world gameplay. Man, it's just, I think that I've heard a lot lately, like a lot from a lot of different people on the web, that they kind of think that the open world is hurting storytelling. And in games, I mean, and I think that that's one way of looking at it. I think that personally, there are a lot of games that you got like exceptions where it's like the Outer Wilds, which is like, this is a game that tells its story through the open world, right? And so like that works really super well. But I also think that, like, man, a lot of them, I mean, like, just look at, Ubisoft or whatever, like it just is not lending much to it, to have it in an open world. I mean, like, it almost feels like it's obligatory, or it's like, hey, you remember Grand Theft Auto? Let's try to make a game like that.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, but like my thought is, I think that it's a tool in the toolbox of the game designer, is the ability to make a game an open world game. And it's great that we have it so easily accomplishable, achievable nowadays with the technology and everything, it's easier now. But I think that we might point at the tool itself sometime and say that's a bad tool. It's the culprit of all of these, imperfect stories or whatever. But I think that what's going on is it's imperfectly used by people who don't understand how to use it, or who really should be making a more linear story game that isn't an open world game.
Yeah.
I mean, like, can you imagine The Last of Us or anything by Naughty Dog being, half as good if it was an open world exploration game?
Yeah. And then, like, and can you really say that, like, you get, like, on that front, and then on the other end, like, you have perfect examples of open worlds that really do work, Outer Wilds, Minecraft,
works.
Like, it just works. Like, when that's what your game is built around, like Minecraft wouldn't make sense if anything but an open world the size of freaking Neptune, like, and Outer Wilds,
or strategy games or simulation games like Mountain Blade or Crusader Kings or Civilization.
It obviously it's an open world, and to say like it needs to be. What else would it be? But that's what those games are trying for. It makes sense. But when you say, I want to tell a very specific story and I want the player to hit all of these beats and I want it to happen about this pace, and you're trying to like subtly manipulate the player to do certain things, and then you're just dealing with all sorts of crazy
You're like
challenges.
You're like a bad dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, it's open. You can do whatever you want, but I'm gonna make you do this, or you're gonna make you feel bad if you don't do this. And if you try to go off the beaten path, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're right with saying like games that don't necessarily need to be open world, or companies who don't necessarily need to make open world games. I feel like there's a pressure nowadays that like the open world, that's what people want. Like these are the games that we need to keep making. I almost think it's like,
Right.
I don't know, kind of like how the live action is with movies, where it's like this live action 2-hour movie is the definitive form of this art form. Like animated isn't as good, or this way of storytelling, like it has to be this thing. It's like, the like definitive form of this game is when it's a big open world, adventure, even though that doesn't always necessarily work for every game. And so, even if they started writing an interesting story, or if they started, with an interesting thing, then it's like, well, to make this better, it's going to be open world because that's what people want. And then all of a sudden that's working against with what they had before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tool. I think it's a tool in the toolbox, man. And I think that what I'm really kind of curious about is like what makes for a good use of it, and what makes for an inadequate, that's not the way, a less effective use of it, and
Yeah.
anyway, so that's kind of what that's been on my mind lately with this whole idea.
Yeah,
for sure.
Definitely. If I can, to continue that, I guess segueing into a point, a game I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of riffs on that a bit. You said like what how, in what ways can it be used? Like how when is it good? When is it not? I wanted to talk about a game that has a very empty open world that doesn't have a whole lot in it, but that I love anyway. And that's Shadow of the Colossus by Team Eco. And it's a very it's a linear game, and as in you go from one point to the next point. You accomplish the tasks in a set order. You play the game in a set order. You fight this monster, and then you fight this monster, and then you fight this monster, and that's all the game is. It's just fighting monsters.
Yeah.
You fight 16 monsters, the game is over. Like, that's all there is. But it has this vast world that basically just serves as an in between monsters. Like, that's all that it's massive, open, it's empty. There's nothing there. It takes a long time to get across it. It's not especially challenging navigation wise. You usually have like a compass. You point your magic sword and it tells you pretty much exactly where to go. And so you don't end up needing to travel over most of this open world. But it is there. And I love how massive it is, and I love how empty it is, and I liked how much space it gave me to think. It's a very, I don't know, I think Shadow of the Colossus is a very pensive game for me. It's slow and it's thoughtful. It's quiet. There's no music most of the time. And so I loved this space, just riding my horse in these open fields for, a half hour until I get to the next Colossus to fight. So I contrast that to something like Breath of the Wild, where the whole world is filled with goodies and secrets and interesting things to discover, and Shadow of the Colossus, which is a game that's not about exploration at all, but still has an open world, and I had a wonderful experience with it. So I wondered if you guys had similar experiences. Or if you feel the same way, if you've played that game or other games.
Yeah.
So
I think it definitely works well in Shadow of Colossus, because I think there's just this great isolated feeling, that you're this lone wanderer in the ruins of this ancient civilization. The only things left are just these giant, marvels. And it's interesting that
Mm-hmm.
you brought up Breath of the Wild as a contrast to that, because I think, well, yeah, there is a map filled with a lot of things to do. I guess especially compared to Shadow of Colossus, I really appreciated the moments of emptiness and space in that game as well. Uh, Kind of
Mm.
similar, feeling like a little isolated, feeling like, on your own journey, figuring things out, just taking in the world. And I've seen people play that game and they would complain when they're exploring and they're just, if they don't find some tangible item or some,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, interactive thing, that it was a waste. Whereas I really
Yeah.
enjoyed just seeing the, beauty that was in the design of the world, that was in the landscape. Um,
Mm.
and so I think that,
That game is so beautiful. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that is something that we are losing a little bit with some of these open world games, is that, because I do think there are a lot of games that have to feel like they have to fill every square inch with something, to make sure the player does not become disengaged and put down their game. That they have to,
Mm-hmm.
make it seem like it's worthwhile, or have some kind of item somewhere. So, and I think there is a little bit of a system where, if you explore something, if you do something challenging, you expecting some kind of the reward, and the game being able to give you a reward. I don't think that that's a bad
Mm-hmm.
system, but I think a game also trusting in itself to just, I don't know, allow for space and emptiness, I think is a beautiful thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Man, at the same time, like I play games. This is really, really interesting to me that like the open space of the open emptiness is so cool because
Mm-hmm.
you're right. Like I didn't really think about it until just now, but like yeah, a lot of games, a lot of open world games. I actually really like those moments where you're in between things and you're just
Mm-hmm.
traveling.
Mm-hmm.
I do also get annoyed with backtracking and time wasting and stuff sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Maybe maybe that's more an issue with. Here's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about games that have like a heavy fast travel system, open
Mm-hmm.
world games that have like no desire for you to, to wander through the open world, and would rather you just fast traveled everywhere. Which in my mind is like, well, then what's the point? You know,
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
where like you get a quest that takes you, like the way that it works is it just like quests you back and forth between these two places over and over again without any kind of variation or intentionalness on the part of the designer,
Mm-hmm.
intentionality. But and this is all a very vague way of me saying I don't like Skyrim, but like the but like I do like, man, I don't know, I like those open world empty spaces. And it's not that I want content stuffed into everywhere. I just want it to feel like, I don't know. I don't want to be wasting my time, I think is kind of what I run into, you know?
Uh-huh.
Like I
Yeah.
don't want to be backtracking back and forth across the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And like the beauty of it, I think, is the exploration. And I think once you get familiar with this with an area, you're not really exploring it anymore. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
I think something, that's really cool about open world games, and I think the reason they just became so popular is because before, open world games were really a thing, it was just kind of moving from, I don't know, if it was like an adventure game, you'd go from one room, go through a load screen into another room. You might have space to run around that room, but everything was like specifically designed around that room, and finding something. And so I think games weren't able to really have spaces and a whole lot of room to explore because everything was so compartmentalized. And so I think that lack of, the separation and just sort of like one chunk to another chunk, I think is what feels so freeing. That it's like, oh, now there's room, that there can be space here, that there can be this room to explore, that it's not just like one thing to the next thing to, through a load screen. And I think that really works to build immersion in the experience. And yeah, I think that's one of the things that's appealing about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, that's my thought. Those are yours, I guess.
You got me thinking. I'm gonna be thinking about this
No, yeah, definitely.
for a bit
Yeah.
now. I'm kind of all pensive like myself, like I'm playing Shadow of the Colossus and wondering if I should be killing these guys, you know?
I think the crazy thing about Shadow of the Colossus is like it was like one of the earlier open world games, right? You know,
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
PlayStation 2 or something. It's
Yeah, PlayStation 2, man.
Yep.
and there's no HUD, there's not a lot of direction, there's not a lot of icons, like if it came out today, well, a remake, came out just a few years ago,
Hmm.
but like it would feel like a revolutionary game in the genre.
Yeah. That's funny. Even though it already happened,
Right.
because everyone
Yeah.
just like
Well, and I think this is kind of the problem that a lot of game developers run into nowadays is that they don't understand the tools in their toolbox and they don't understand what they can do or why they should be used.
Mm-hmm.
And and that includes like the open world and things like that. And so I think that like people maybe they look at Shadow of the Colossus, or they look at Grand Theft Auto, or they look at um the early open world games that were very successful, and they're like, hey, it's got this, and they're missing and they might say, hey, it's got an open world, or, and this goes for, I think, any game mechanic. Hey, this has a crafting system. Hey, this has a
Oh
fast
yeah.
travel. Hey, this has, time management or whatever. And the thing is, like, I don't know many people who actually forget that last one, but but uh, but they don't understand why there's a crafting system, why there's an open world, and how to use those things
Mm-hmm.
effectively. And they might be, and it's not like I'm not saying that it's all like a bunch of corporate board decisions that say, hey, according to these trends, these are the games that will sell. And like, I know that that's a thing, definitely that's a thing, but like, um, and it's like, artistically, kind of bankrupt, right? That's kind of a problem in my mind.
Right.
But I think also a lot of people genuinely are trying to make a good game, but they don't quite get what made that other open world game
Yeah.
so good,
Yeah. Instead of working from a toolbox, they're working from a checklist that like it needs to have all these things
Yeah,
to beat
yeah.
it, rather than just elements that you can use for your own artistic purposes.
And you just
and
must be intentional about it.
yeah, I mean, and that's something so refreshing about Breath of the Wild, I think, was that like it took Breath of the Wild is not perfect, but like it took the world by storm. Like
Hmm.
The Legend of Zelda was like, I know some people who play Zelda. They're nerds, It's kind of like the thing. And then when Breath of the Wild came out, everybody wanted to Switch, and everybody was playing Breath of the Wild.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was playing Breath of the Wild. Like
Yeah, that thing sold the Switch, man.
it it was totally remarkable. And that game, like it took these open world tools, and it said, well, we don't need that, and we do need that, and we don't want that, and we do want this. And so, like, it has towers, but they're not Ubisoft towers. They're better than Ubisoft towers, because like, um it was willing to get rid of so much that other games were doing,
Mm-hmm.
that would just become common practice. I don't know, just and really look at the open
Yeah.
world as a tool. And do I think it did it perfectly? No, but I'm so grateful that it exists. And now you get so many Breath of the Wild clones. You get like, oh,
Oh
Breath of the
gosh.
Wild paraglider. Like, how many paragliders have you seen? Since Breath of the Wild, like every game's got a paraglider. It's
Yeah.
so funny because that's that's I think that's what
And you
some
can
people see.
climb
Yeah. Oh, you can
everything.
climb. You can paraglide. All
You
right.
can freeze in
Ubisoft's
midair
like,
and shoot a
Yeah.
bow and arrow.
yep. And so like, it's all over the place. It's this, uh, and you get a lot of people using the tools that don't understand why they were used in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And like,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly.
But uh, but yeah.
We could talk about Minecraft clones sometime too. That would be
Oh, that would be
pretty much the
fascinating.
Oh yeah.
same thing that we're talking about right now. All
Uh
the
huh.
crafting systems and survival mechanics that people and the open. It just, yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
Is the difference from intentional game design around a specific artistic vision to just trying to capitalize on what's popular and what made money.
Yeah,
Mm,
fascinating stuff. But I guess that's a
yeah,
discussion for another time.
yeah, and well, I think I'm sure that some of these thoughts will continue to come up throughout the
Oh
remainder
yeah.
of this
Oh
discussion,
yeah.
even and in the future. But Aaron, you want to talk about Cyberpunk a bit, um, uh,
Yeah,
so do that. Talk about
of course. Yeah.
it,
So
if you wouldn't mind.
I picked up Cyberpunk again after setting it down for several months because the game was
Hmm.
unfinished, and it still is unfinished. But there's also, I don't know, like it still feels like a game that was made with some intention behind it, with trying to do something different in some ways. I think a lot of it got a little jumbled up with just trying to do what was popular, trying to make like another Grand Theft Auto. But there is still so much in the game that is excellent. Um,
Hmm.
but something I noticed that I think really reflects something about open world and kind of shows an interesting paradox was with two different ways in the game that I was traveling, basically. So, one instance, pick up a quest, and let's get to from point A to point B. And so I call my motorcycle, and your motorcycle comes and goes right to you and stops, and you get on the motorcycle, and then you drive your way through the city to get to the spot. Well, the driving in that game could use some work. I'm also not the most skilled at it. There's also a lot of slow traffic and things to run into. So as I'm trying to get from point A to point B, I'm crashing into other cars. I'm flipping off my bike, running into, lamp posts. I'm getting stuck on something, and having to turn around or missing my point. Um, and I just thought it was interesting that this was part of the open world, part of the exploration, part of being able to go around the city. Like that's a huge thing, and that freedom is often tied to immersion. It's like, oh, you don't have to go through loading screens. You don't have to have somebody play for you. You playing for yourself and you being able to maneuver anywhere you want. That should keep you more immersed in the game. But here's the thing: the character I'm playing as, he started off as this nomad who worked on cars, who's like this big kind of grease monkey, and who knows stuff about technology, and he's been in this city for a long time. He should know his way around, and so I'm playing as this character, and I'm driving super poorly, crashing into things. It loses that immersion because it's not something that the character would actually do, right? It's like we wouldn't be crashing into stuff, we know what was going around. And so I thought that was an interesting thought. But then there was this other mission I was doing where instead of my character driving, he gets in the car with someone else. And the whole game is it's the first person perspective, except for when you're driving, you can change it to third person, in a couple different layers further
Hmm.
back or close together, so you can see where you're going better. But in this
Hmm.
section, being in the car, it was only in first person. Um, and the difference of crashing into buggy things and flying off my motorcycle and turning around and getting lost and feeling such a disconnect from the character to being this incredible first person view with this person in the car, great character model, able to have these conversations while you're driving from point A to point B, while you look out the window and you see just the city go by and you see the change. The car doesn't stop, it doesn't get stuck on stuff, it's not crashing into things. It was
Hmm.
so much more immersive than the first bit. Um, it was actually incredible, and it was something you could skip. There was an option skip traveling. It's like, why would I do this? This is one of the best parts of the game. Feel like I'm in a car. I feel like I'm talking with somebody. I'm learning about this character. I'm able to have choice in how I talk with him. I can turn my head and look out the window. I can look out I don't know. So even though in some in some way that freedom I didn't have the same amount of freedom in that point. I wasn't able to control where the car was going. I wasn't um, able to stop along the way and do things. It felt so much more immersive, and even I don't know, in a way, I was able to appreciate the world more because I could still see I don't know, everywhere I was going was a place could be explored, but it was more consistent with what the character would experience, and what a real person would experience than me just driving into things and kind of working against the game and the mechanics there. So I thought that was really interesting, and I don't know if anyone's ever, I don't know, noticed some of that contrast or other ways in which kind of it seems like open world games have the goal of both being free and immersive, and if they've seen other ways and when those two have worked against each other.
Mm. This makes me think so much of this problem I run into sometimes, where I'm trying to play a game and I'm trying to like invest myself in it and be a part of the world and everything. But then there's that instinct that says, hey, why don't you, instead of following traffic laws, drive, uh, at 100 miles an hour through this residential area so you can get to where you're going faster.
Yeah.
And how about, instead of taking these beautifully crafted paths and routes and things like that, you cut across the countryside and like jump over the janky geometry and try to scale the Bethesda mountain by sideways jumping up the whole thing, because it's more direct and it's more efficient,
With your
and
horse.
like with my horse, right? I might have killed a couple horses that way, but
it's okay, it works.
It does. It just works.
It just works.
But the thing is, like, I actually really would rather, man, I find myself wishing that I wasn't doing those things, but at the same time I feel like I have to, which maybe, I don't know, it kind of reminds me of what I was talking about at the beginning of this episode. Like, sometimes I want to be playing it differently, but I feel like I can't or shouldn't or won't.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting.
Yeah.
And I don't think the solution is, well, then stop playing it wrong, you doofus. I think that there's a way. There's got to be a way to, like, encourage you to make the game so that the best way to play it is the most enjoyable way to play it and the most fulfilling way to play it.
Yeah.
What that is, I don't know yet.
There's two thoughts that come into my brain. They're a little disconnected, but maybe you guys can help me make sense of it, because I feel like I'm kind of on the. There's something here, and I want to find out what it is.
Yeah.
There's a nugget, I think. And that is you talking about riding in the backseat of this car as you're going from one thing to the next. And maybe this is just I'm stuck on travel now, but like I think of playing Grand Theft Auto Online together. Now, the three of us played that a bit, goofed around, had a lovely time. It's a pretty chaotic, wild, bonkers game. And often when you're driving at 200 miles an hour, in your big old tank or whatever you're driving.
Yeah.
But what I loved, like, I found that in that game, I wanted to just be in the car. I liked to hop in the car, to not drive. I liked to go into first person. We'd all point our guns at each other or do stupid stuff in the car, inside the car. We mess around. But like, there was a different way to engage with travel.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't as direct input. It wasn't like it was more passive, but we were engaging in a different way. Suddenly we could all just chat and point our guns at each other, and like, we weren't all focused on driving and trying not to die at 100 miles an hour. So like, it was easier to talk. And if I was driving, we were probably rolling around a little bit because I suck at driving in GTA. So like, there's that. But
yeah.
But we were engaging in a different way. And the other game that comes to mind is Animal Crossing. There's this opening sequence in Animal Crossing where you're on a train and you're having a conversation with somebody on a train. It's like your intro, like where you make your character or whatever. And I have always adored that segment of Animal Crossing. And in the original Animal Crossing, when you went to visit another person's town, you'd hop back on that train and you just have this, you'd find a random character would be on the train every time, and you'd just have a chat with the character on the train. And it was a completely different form of engagement than, I wasn't driving the train. I wasn't even looking out the window and looking at the pretty scenery. I was using this opportunity to have a slow, mellow chat with another character. And that was so immersive. Even though it's not direct input, and not in the same way. It's a different form of engagement. And I don't know. I like that. I don't know,
Just
thoughts.
yeah, it's just so
Yeah.
interesting to me. Okay, so like I'm thinking now, it's like I also love that thing in Animal Crossing, man. Like part of it is I just love trains, but like
Uh-huh.
yeah, well, and actually this makes me think of I think there's something here though. I think you're right. I think we're on the kind of like we're on something here. And Aaron kind of mentioned it before. He was talking about how like he kind of lost some direct input and direct freedom control, but like the
Mm-hmm.
game got better in
Uh-huh.
that moment. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because kind of like you were saying, Aaron, it slowed you down and made you look around and see everything kind of with a new lens instead of with the lens of like I got to get from point A to point B as fast as
Mhm.
possible, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And like, oh man, I was playing Cities Skylines last night for a little while, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a city I've been working on for a while now. Not like a long time. I'm not like a pro at the game. There's like 20,000 people or something like that,
Uh-huh.
and but I built it, you know. And a lot of the time I'm just sitting there trying to optimize how do I build these roads, how do I zone, how do I place these power plants and education systems and blah blah blah. And it's all just like super strategic, and like that's what I'm thinking. And then um I was actually just trying to capture like some footage for this for something, and I click. What you can do is you can click on the cars, right, and
Mm-hmm.
you just like pop into a camera that you know it's like a first person view from that car,
Mm-hmm.
and
That's
it was
cool.
amazing, man. It was so cool. I was like driving around the city. I was just not controlling it, just following. I popped into a police car and followed him as he
Yeah.
went on his patrol,
Uh-huh.
and and then he like responded to an emergency at like a church or a cemetery or something. I don't know what happened
Uh-huh.
there,
There's a
but like
ghost.
yeah, it must have been a ghost. but uh, but uh, but like man, like I saw the city through new eyes at that moment, and it was because I was just looking around and watching it go by while I rode along with this cop car,
Mm.
and I was like, oh, I built these roads. Oh, it feels so much more like a real city from this perspective. And like, oh, I'm slowing down and like seeing everything. And like, oh man, I didn't even know that was there. I didn't know this is the way it feels from the ground level. And
Uh-huh.
like, I was fascinated. I could have stayed there and watched it for a really long time. Especially because, oh, I built this and that. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. And then, like, yeah, it was cool. I really liked it. But like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess we're specifically talking about traveling, but like, I don't know, man. It was just awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's something so universally human about being stuck in transit, right? Whether you're on a train, whether you're in a car. There was a big deal when the Mass Effect Legendary Editions came out. That one of the ways you kind of traveled from one area to another in the Citadel was through an elevator, and it would
Mm-hmm.
be it's how the game of that time would handle the loading times. That you'd go through the elevator, the
Yeah.
game would
Yeah.
load, but it would have some elevator music. You could talk to people in the elevator. You could
Oh,
you
that's
could kind of
cool.
Mm.
have an experience with it. Well, when the Legendary Edition came out and it was running on newer systems, like it didn't need that time to load, and so you could skip the elevator sequence. And there was a
Mm.
whole thing. So many players didn't want to skip the elevator sequences. So like even when there's the option to fast forward it to get to it, it's like no, they wanted those moments, those moments of yeah, just being stuck in an elevator with your friends, and waiting for it to come up. Because I think there's something so human about that, and because it's human, it
Mm-hmm.
then is really immersive, and you connect with the world and you connect with the characters more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think what makes it so good is that it slows you down and you
Yeah.
look around a little bit more and you
Mm-hmm.
think a little bit more. And like maybe this is even what makes the travel in Shadow of the Colossus so good is that it's like there's nothing to do there, so it's really just traveling, so you're kind of thinking while you're doing it, That might be why that's so good.
Yeah,
But
it's easy.
yeah,
It's easy mechanically.
yeah, it's like
Like,
automatic almost. And so like
mm-hmm.
whereas if I'm traveling in Breath of the Wild or Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption or something like that, I'm gonna be like trying to move as fast as possible, from point A to point B. It's a different
Mm-hmm.
mindset. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe games shouldn't necessarily eliminate that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know, maybe not because I do find myself kind of frustrated sometimes that I'm jumping across rooftops when it doesn't make any sense to, or when I'm, because I'm trying to get somewhere faster, or when I'm off-roading because it's faster, like,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and then I end up wrecking my car or whatever. But like the maybe maybe you just need to take maybe games just need to have times where you slow down and look around you a little bit more,
Yeah.
And I think that the the train in Animal Crossing, the ride along I did in City Skylines, or Aaron's ride
Yeah.
along with his character in Cyberpunk, like I think
Yeah.
that's the value of those experiences, is that it's like, hey, I'm going to take away your really goal oriented, objective driven, try to be really efficient brain for a second and replace it with one that has to wait,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it makes you stop and experience a little bit more.
Yeah. I think there's this idea that like if you're playing a game, you've got to be playing it every moment that you're playing it. You're playing this game. You're there to I want to be mashing the X button the whole gosh
Mm-hmm.
darn time. Like I'm here to play a game. I'm not here to watch a movie. I think of like there's these there's the joke like this isn't a game, it's just a movie where you push A to continue, or you just
Yeah.
push
Yeah.
forward. But like I think of like
Yeah.
Night in the Woods, like which is such a simple, like it's a very easy game. Like your direct input is so easy. But I like utterly adore that game, and is one of the most like nostalgic. I feel so connected with this world. I walked this
Yeah.
sidewalk like so many times and chatted with the same people, and they always just got something new to say. It's simple, it's easy, but since the game isn't telling you to mash X to continue, like you can, you're not super focused on how do I put one foot in front of the other foot, or drive my car through traffic, or
Mm-hmm.
or fly, or whatever. You get such a more, it forces you to slow down. Like you're it was like you said, Zach, it has you slow down.
And just look around and experience stuff.
Yeah.
Like Night in the Woods, the same thing for me. I feel so nostalgic and so like so connected to that thing. And I remember playing it, and every in-game day or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to just explore I wanted to milk every day for all it was worth, because I don't know why exactly. I guess that was the game experience, like
Mm-hmm.
the game was about talking to everybody, and pursuing the relationships and following the story threads to their conclusion. And so like there was no desire for me to be really efficient with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, like if I ran out of things to do, I would move on, because I wasn't gonna like
Mm-hmm.
just waste my time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But like that was the whole point of that game, was like, you know, to look around you and to experience and to think. I mean, it's kind of like what the theme is of the story in and of itself. And
Mm-hmm.
in kind of a way, it's this lost, aimless college student that who's back
Uh-huh.
from college and doesn't know what to do with their life. And like, and they're just, yeah, man, it was so good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a key thing too, is that games should really lean into what they're about and what they're good at. Right? We were kind of talking about earlier how a lot of games just follow the open world trend because that's what's popular. Even if they don't need
Yeah.
it. Um, I think like if a game really excels in its story and excels in its character, and is about something that's slower paced, like if that's what the game's about, like I don't mind if sometimes it feels like like an interactive cutscene, or like a walking simulator or things. Like let me
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
experience what you want to show me. And I think that's the thing about Cyberpunk as well. When it's really good, it's it's about the characters, it's about the writing, it's about the stories, it's about those like little interactions. It's not about the running and gunning and driving all over the place. Like so many other games have done it and done it better. Um,
Mm-hmm.
where it really works is in those moments, and so I think those times where it forces you to lean into that. I think that's where the game excels. And I think if more games knew what that focus was and didn't feel pressured, if you're GTA, yeah, be crazy, be chaotic. That's what people want. Um,
Mm-hmm.
But if that's not what your game's about, if less games felt pressured to include that in there, I think, I don't know, maybe we would have more of those moments where everything just fits together nicely, and you can have that immersive experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I'm thinking about a lot of the games I love, which are like really kind of creative games, builder games, things like Minecraft or City Skylines or Sim City back in the day, or whatever, or even strategy games that you have some kind of civilization or Crusader Kings or whatever. Like I feel like I feel like stopping to like look around, and there this is kind of true of life and video games. There's some things that
Mm-hmm.
you only see if you're slowed down, if
Yeah.
you like. And I don't think
Mm-hmm.
necessarily that. And what's kind of cool is that something I think that I get from the City Skylines thing experience that I had was that like it doesn't have to be forced. It was like there's an option
Mm-hmm.
to stop and do a cinematic camera or do a ride along or whatever. And like
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, hey, you know what I want? I want to see that, and I click it and I see it and I'm like, that was awesome. Now I can go back to building and maybe I'll do it
Mm-hmm.
again later. But it's kind of like it's almost like without that, it almost feels like the game is missing a lot of its meaning. Where it's like um and this is something that came up when we talked about that video tribute that our brother did for our Minecraft server like a year or two ago. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like when that happened, suddenly, I don't know, we that video slows us down and makes us look at it and say, "Oh, I never really looked at it from this lens before." This is a lens of appreciation rather than a lens of how do I optimize.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it almost makes me want to have like in I think in Civilization 3 there was this palace builder where you kind of like as you developed and got more powerful and stuff, you could like work on this 3D model of your palace. um which has not been a feature since then, but like it kind of like lets you, like stop and do something a little more immersed and a little more, hey, I appreciate this beautiful palace I built. Look at my beautiful palace. I mean, like it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't perfect. It wasn't even really all that fun, but like I don't know, it's an idea that's kind of cool. And then
Yeah.
I kind of wish that it was in like Crusader Kings a little bit where you could like stop and look around and like maybe more directly see where your character is at in his life or her life, and then like where they've come from and
Yeah.
what they've seen, and maybe just
Mm-hmm.
some way to like reflect a little bit more and appreciate what has happened and what is currently happening and what the dynasty has accomplished up to this point,
Yeah.
in a way that's not like, okay, what's next? It's more like, hey, let's just stop and look and appreciate what's already, like let's think about the game as it's already played out.
Yeah. And like you said, it can be optional. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't need to force you to do that. Like Aaron, like you said, you could have skipped that cutscene. You could have skipped the travel time, but you wanted to. And maybe some people don't. And
Hmm.
like I know that some people don't. I'm sure that some people didn't like the elevator rides in Mass Effect, and some people wished the train ride in Animal Crossing would just be over faster. But like, I think that there's having that be there, having that as an option. Well, for one thing, it just makes the game. It means more people can enjoy that thing. But I think like a lot of people don't realize how much they would enjoy having that option until it's given to
Yeah.
them. I think Cyberpunk. Like I in my brain when I think about that game, I'm like, oh yeah, I'd probably want to drive my own car. But then confronted with, oh, but you could ride in the back seat. Like that doesn't sound fun. But then when I really think about it and like what you're saying, in this discussion, I'm like, oh no, that would be awesome. But you don't realize that until the option's given to you. Um, and sometimes some games force it, but I don't think they have to. I don't think they have to force you to slow down. So I think that
Yeah.
it could go either way.
It's
Yeah.
always interesting because I think sometimes there are some games that try to leave too many things optional that they can never
Mm-hmm.
really develop anything because somebody might never engage with it, so really why add a whole lot of depth to it. Or I don't know, when games become a little too consumer friendly, it's like, oh, you can play this however way you want, like this is cool, but you don't have to do it. Like I feel like it weakens it a little bit. Like I don't know, I feel like games need to own what they are and be like, yeah, this is the kind of game we're making. This is the best way to experience it. Um, I don't know. We want you to do that. I was saw this video recently about difficulty levels in video games, and the argument was like
Mm-hmm.
games shouldn't have difficulty levels because either you make the difficulty level too easy, and then you miss out on some of the challenge or some of the depth that the game developer was intending, or you make it too difficult and you get frustrated with the game and you think the game is unfair and you're not you know a
Mm-hmm.
you're missing a lot. It's like if games just had, I don't know, this is what our game is. We've tried to balance it best we could. We want to add, these different experience. It's this type of game, so if you want a different type of game, there's other games that you could play. But we're really going to own what we are, and we think that you'll enjoy it, and we're going to do our best to try to make sure that you do. I don't know. I think that just adds so much more care, so much more depth, um, just this deliberate art to it, rather than,
Mm-hmm.
because I think there's so many open world games. And again, and I think we talk about Ubisoft a lot. I think they do this with like, oh yeah, if you wanna do this crazy action thing, you can do this crazy action thing. You wanna do it. I'm thinking the latest Assassin's Creed game. There's like this thing you could stack rocks. It's like, oh yeah, there's this slow
Mm-hmm.
stacking rock game where you could take in your environment and do this. Everybody hates that part of that game. Like people who play that game don't want to do that because it's this optional thing that's like, oh, if they want to complete the game, they're forced to do this, but it's not really what the game's about. And so I don't know. Games shouldn't just try to do everything and be everything for everybody. I think when they know what they are and they can really just lean into that and trust the player and allow the player to trust the game. I don't know. To me, it just seems like that is better.
Is there seriously a rock stacking game in this game?
Yeah, you make cairns.
Yeah, in Assassin's
Like not
Creed
just rocks,
Valhalla,
they're cairns.
you stack rocks to make cairns, and it's supposed to be like this slow meditative thing. I know Ghost of Tsushima had a similar thing, but because of the type
Like,
of games that they are, and because of the people that play them and the expectations they have, I don't know. Most views I've heard about the game is like, this part is really boring and not worth it, and it made me frustrated that I had to do that to get 100% completion. So it's like, I don't know.
This brings up so many questions for me. Like, I want to talk about completionizing. I want to talk about completion. I want to talk about intended game vision. I want to talk about you're bringing up some really, really interesting stuff, Aaron.
So yeah, I know. I just opened up this can of worms of game design.
No, it's great. And I really, really want to dive into that at some point.
I'm just watching a video of this stacking stone mini game now. Holy cow!
All right. Well,
Hey, he did it.
Well, I'll move. I think we're going to move on to our next point, if that's okay. Thanks for sharing those thoughts, Aaron. And I wanted to talk about CD Projekt Red's other big game, The Witcher 3, for which I know that we all have much affection. I regret to say that I also may be blaspheming a little bit here, because my experience is not inherently positive.
Grab the pitchfork.
Yeah, I know. Get ready. It's time to.
No.
grab. That's a very Witcher thing to do. Yeah. So, oops. I just tripped in my chair. I'm not really sure how I managed to do that. Anyways,
breaking immersion.
So I was playing The Witcher. Yeah. More games should have chair tripping. It'd be more relatable for me.
Yeah.
Anyways, playing The Witcher, an open world game with a beautiful open world that I love very much. But there's this thing that would happen to me where I'm playing along and I'm doing my witchering and I'm killing monsters and I'm doing quests and stuff, and I walk along and I talk to this peasant, and peasant says, "Oh, yeah, I can't find my brother. He's lost in the woods. He's probably getting eaten by a werewolf or something, Like, oh no, I gotta help this guy who's got his werewolf-eaten brother disappeared into the monster-filled woods or whatever. Like, okay, I'll do that, but then I'll get distracted by something shiny, or another peasant, or a random monster or whatever, and then I'll forget about the peasant with his werewolf brother and then I'll go to town, and then the sun will go down, and then I'll cut my haircut and I'll trim my beard and I'll go play some cards at the bar. And by this point, the sun's rising again because I've been doing this all night. And then I'm talking to some tavern guy and he's like, "Hey, there's some neckers in the water. Go kill them and give you some money." And so I take a contract and I go fight some monsters. And that takes about a day. You know, the sun's rising and setting. And then the next day, I'm flipping through my journal and I realize there's a peasant somewhere whose sibling disappeared 3 days ago now. And I run back to the peasant. And I follow the trail of the monster tracks, and I go into the woods, and I'm just in time to save him from being eaten by a werewolf or turning into a werewolf or whatever. I'm just in time. Yep. And and this bothers me because the world is this dynamic, like it presents itself as this dynamic place. I watch the sunrise, I watch it set. I've even got a little clock that tells me what time it is.
Mm-hmm.
People move around, they have daily routines. I watch them go to bed and wake up. But the game feels fixed in these, like there's this feeling that nothing important happens unless I'm there to make it happen. Every quest, it waits for me to arrive. Nothing important's gonna happen if I'm not there to see it happen. And time loses its meaning outside of what is immediately convenient for me.
Yeah.
Like, and it bugs me. It doesn't ruin the game for me. I love The Witcher 3 still. It was more of a mild inconvenience that like popped up every now and then. But like the fact that this open world had this open clock, I guess, open time.
Yeah.
This idea of time in the open world not really meaning anything, despite looking like it should. Just thought that was really interesting, and it's not exclusive to The Witcher. I think this happens in a lot.
Oh,
of
no,
games.
not at all.
I don't.
So,
I think I've yet to play an open world game where there is like time constraints and outside of like very
Outer Wilds
specific missions. That's true. Yeah, Outer Wilds.
Yeah, yeah.
But also at the same time,
Yep.
Since there's a loop, like you're also
Yeah.
you can
That
get
is
back
true.
to it. But like, and things in The Witcher and other games, I know like time of day will sometimes be a thing. Like you'll get a quest and it's like, oh, come back in the morning, and it doesn't have to be the next morning. It could be a morning,
It could be
20 hours later. But
yeah,
this time of day.
yeah.
But I don't know if
months.
I don't know if I played a game where someone's like, hurry, my brother's gonna get eaten by werewolves, and then you come back and it's like, you were too late, he got eaten by werewolves.
Werewolves.
See, I have, but it's not a narrative game, and that's kind of, I think, well, okay, that something like that happened to me once in Kingdom Come Deliverance. I don't think that's the rule for that game. It was like, okay, we're not gonna wait for you, and then it was like, oh my gosh, they're actually not gonna wait for me. Okay, but so that's aside. I think generally it does wait for you. It was just that one time. Anyway, but like but outside of like narrative games like Kingdom Come Deliverance or The Witcher or Breath of Zelda. Oh, that's not what I meant to say. Breath of the Wild. or whatever.
Completely different.
Should
game.
focus on the wild and not Zelda. You've come up with the issue. Okay.
The Breath of Zelda sounds like some smutty book you'd find like
with like some shirtless dude on a pirate ship on the cover.
Yep.
So, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so it's not like one of those games that I've experienced this in. It's in games like Mountain Blade Warband or Bannerlord or whatever, where I haven't played Bannerlord, but I've played Warband, and in that one it's like it's a simulation, so it works. It's like these are radiant activities. These are based on the constantly shifting mechanisms of everything that's happening in the world all around you. So like, and I think that for some reason my brain wants to say that open world games are Ubisoft and Zelda and Rockstar and CD Projekt Red, and those are open. But like, actually, really though, like, why isn't Warband considered an open world game? Why isn't it's an open world? I can go anywhere I want to, whenever I want to. It's just not a AAA narrative game, and like, and that's kind of, I think, where this kind of thing works, where it can be simulated. I mean, Crusader Kings kind of does that too. It's like, yeah, time matters a ton in Crusader Kings.
Oh, yeah.
It don't wait for
Ticks right
nobody.
along. Yep.
Yep. And so
I died of old age in a duel yesterday because I wasn't managing my time well.
yeah, that was hilarious. Oh my gosh.
You died in the duel? No, old age.
It's like, yeah, I was in the duel, but
Heart
it
gave
wasn't the
out
duel that killed me. But like, and so like, I think this is one of those narrative games that want to have pacings versus a game that wants to have freedom and sandboxy exploration problem conflict things. And it's like, because like, how do you make The Witcher and not do that? You know, like that would be really difficult.
Yeah.
Unless you just like set every quest to expire and therefore fail after a certain period, and then you're just out of stuff to do. And then you could do this
fascinating idea.
It is a fascinating idea.
Finite game, like
yeah, you only have X hours to play this game, man.
Yeah, and then it's over.
Yeah, that's interesting. Or you could do the Skyrim thing where it's like a bunch of Radiant quests where it's like, which are totally meaningless, and I hate them more than I hate anything almost of that kind. You know, like they're terrible. It's like, hey, you joined the Fighters Guild, right? Now that you've done all the important stuff, there's like someone in, you know, Rorikstead that needs to get beat up. So can you go beat him up and then we'll pay you? And it's like some priestess or something who's like really nice, or you know, some farmer who's never hurt anyone, and and then you beat him up, and then they're like best friends with you afterward anyway because it doesn't matter because it's Skyrim. So, but like in a game like Warband, like every decision you make does have an impact on the relationships you have with people and on the world around you, like the political strategic situation. And like, you know, you don't get quests that are just quests. You get quests that get generated based on the world's circumstances, you know? So it's like, oh no, someone got captured. Hey, can you mount a rescue mission? And then, yeah, sure, I'll go do that. But then like they might get released by the time you get there. So it's like, oh, never mind. You know?
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it's just, I don't know, like I've seen it work, but it's not in those kinds of games like The Witcher or your Rockstar or your Ubisoft type games, you know.
Yeah. I was actually thinking in Assassin's Creed Odyssey there actually are a few time restrained quests, but it's not like, oh, like you need to get here at this time or this is going to happen. You'll meet someone and it's like, oh, I lost my shipment of wine and I don't know how to get it. And it's like, oh, do you want me to get a shipment of wine? It's like, no, I want you to kill all the sharks in the area. It's like what? And so there'll just be a thing. It's like, oh, you have 5 hours to kill all the sharks in the area. It's like, no. Like once.
So dumb.
Yeah, it's like, oh, my wine fell in the water. It's like, oh, well, why don't you swim get it? No, I'm afraid of the sharks. Oh, so you want me to kill the sharks? It's like, what? Okay.
That is the most video gamey contrived, like, oh my gosh.
And that's what all the
so
time
funny.
quests are in that game. It's just you have like, and it's like, I don't know, 24 hours to do it, but it's like some grindy fetch quest thing that's just going to take you a while that encourages you to do more in a certain play time to, you know, it's just part of that grind microtransaction stuff. It's just scummy. So
yeah,
don't do it like that if, you know.
It's a good moral. I think of, on the subject of open world games that we might not consider to be open world games, you know, because my thoughts are, you know, Breath of the Wild or Ubisoft, like Stardew Valley, or all the Harvest Moon games for that matter, like have a clock. They have a calendar. They have seasons that pass and time changes.
That's true, yeah.
And I actually really, really like that. Now, granted, they don't have like they're more systemic, and they have sometimes like these radiant quests like Skyrim kind of does, like the
Yeah.
random guy's like, I'm in the market for a green bean, you know.
A green bean.
There's someone wants a green bean from the bulletin board, so you get them a green bean, and that's about as complicated as the radiant stuff gets. These systemically generated quests. But like there's also just a lot of, I think there's just a lot of meaning that comes from like having to manage your time and living within an actual day-night cycle that means something, where the time of day actually means something. Like playing Skyrim, I remember I was always surprised when, there's Bellathor's goods in the whatever city it is. And that's like the goods store that I always go to. And I would always go to it and try to open it. It's like, the store's closed right now. I was like, why is it closed? That's weird. Like everything else in this game doesn't wait for, waits for me and happens when I'm around. Like, why isn't the store open when I'm
Yeah, the
when
dragon's
I'm
waiting for me.
I know, like, what the heck? Why is the store the only thing that behaves this way? But like, in Stardew, everything behaves that way. Everyone's on a schedule. Everyone's on a clock of some kind.
Yeah.
Outer Wilds is the same way. I mean, it's not the same, but it's doing something similar, where time just plods on.
But how could you do that? How could you do it with something like The Witcher and not be incredibly frustrated?
I got no idea. Yeah, no, I don't know. Like, and I have no idea. I don't know.
I don't know if there's a solution to that. I don't know.
I don't know if there is either. Like,
because it's kind of like having your cake and eating it too. You want a well-paced story, but you also want the freedom of the open world, and I think sometimes you can't have both.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think they're just different. Like, I don't think Stardew and The Witcher are going to be able to be the same thing. And I think that's
a game.
I mean, I'm sure that you could make a game about being a Witcher that like operates on a clock like Stardew Valley, and it'd probably be super compelling and fun. But The Witcher is a story.
The Witcher
like,
mod
it's a pre-written
on
story.
Stardew Valley.
That'd be fun, because The Witcher's fun also because you've got this routine. Like there's this idea of like being a monster hunter and taking jobs and fighting witches, and so like. Stardew's a game about taking jobs and doing farming and like being on the clock and stuff. So that could be an interesting idea. But The Witcher is also a really well written story with really well written characters, with really well crafted moments and a beautifully told plot. And so I just think that often that is at odds with the open world, like we've been talking about this whole time. It's interesting.
I think it's a give and take. It's a sacrifice and stuff. Because, like, actually, I want to play The Witcher in an open world setting. Like, I like the open world of The Witcher, even with its occasional oddnesses,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too. I mean, we've talked about this before, of like how sometimes you as a player have to, I don't know, artificially do something to make the game work for you. Like, I don't know, like if I got a game, actually this happened to me the other day playing Cyberpunk, is I was getting a couple of quests, and there's like one quest that seemed really urgent, and I was like, oh, I have to like go do that quest, like, because it's really urgent, because there's this other thing that I was doing. And so I'd get to a point in, I don't know, I was in the story quest, and I got to this point in the quest where the guy said, I'll be in touch, or let me know what you find. And it's like, okay, now I can go do something else. And then I got a phone call, and somebody was like, oh, you need to help me right now. This person's gone missing, and I don't know where they're at. It's like, oh, well, I have to go do that immediately. But then the issue was that quest that had a lot of urgency behind it was a higher level than I was.
No.
Or there's not really levels in Cyberpunk. There's danger levels, and so there's like moderate danger to very high danger, and this was like a high danger level, and so, which I don't really know what that means, but I think you'd run into that. You run into that too with The Witcher as well. You have quests that kind of are different difficulty scalings, and so if you had a quest that was like, it's like, oh, a werewolf ran off with me brother, and I don't know where he's at, and he might be dead. But then it's like 10 levels higher than you, and if that quest expired, like, that would just be cruel.
Yeah, that would suck.
Here's a potential thing that might be possible in a game like The Witcher that might help with the timing weirdness and stuff like that, is that, like, and obviously this is also comes with a give and take. Like there's some stuff you sacrifice with this, but like maybe a
Yeah.
lot of your quests can be not time sensitive. You know,
Uh-huh.
like maybe it's like, hey, I don't ever. Did you ever hear about that? Like we haven't known what to do about that for like it's been months. It's not like going anywhere. Nothing's. But like there's something mysterious going on over there. Whatever. If you want to like look into it, that'd be cool. We'll pay you. Or
Mm-hmm.
it's like, yeah, if you get around to it in the next year or two, like that'd be good. But like, like, or if it's like a mystery where it's like, or like a murder mystery even, it could be
Mm-hmm.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, they're already dead. It's not like if you don't go do it right now, like
Mm-hmm.
it's okay if you spend a lot of time searching it out and doing other things, So like,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that once again, like I said, it's a give and take. Like you sacrifice the urgency and the compelling kind of sense of
Yeah.
tension that kind of lends itself to, and so
It's kind of what we talked about with
It's like Breath of the
Zelda.
Wild.
Like if
Yeah.
the urgency built over time and wasn't immediate from the get go.
yeah. Well, like what if the urgency just gets there when you're at the point where
Yeah.
it's like
Mm-hmm.
the moment where you have to come in clutch. It's like, oh, I found the murderer. There he is. Now there's some urgency. Now it's like I
Mm-hmm.
gotta catch this guy before he leaves or gets away or kills someone else or something. And it's like
Yeah.
I think it's okay if it like
To be fair,
to
actually, I
that
actually
point.
think there are quite a few quests like that in that game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you actually. I think it's funny that The Witcher actually I think does this better. Like there are only a few moments I can think of in The Witcher that did this to the game's credit. Like
The Witcher is one of the best open world narrative games ever made. It's just
I
it's so good.
absolutely. Um I think
It's one of the
I
best
think it does
written
that a
games
lot.
ever made.
Yeah. But I think it does that a lot too. It's like it often has these slower burn kind of stories, these less urgent. The game is not usually urgent.
Mm-hmm.
It's every now and then where it's like my brother's missing right now, But that's I think the cool thing is that's kind of the exception, and that it took me to have to try to find an exception to get a negative experience with The Witcher is I think
Yeah.
kind of cool. Just speaks to the game's
Yeah.
credit.
And I think, and as we talked about before, like a good story, good narratives, good things you want to engage with, have stakes, have drama, have
Yeah.
some degree of urgency. So I think it always is a balancing act to figure that out. I think if every quest in that game was kind of lackadaisical or just like, oh, when you feel like it, get around to it, or let us know what you find. I think I don't know. It is kind of a good feeling, even if you have to kind of artificially do it yourself. But when you do get something urgent and like, oh yeah, let's do this right away, and kind of get to it, and even if the game would have waited for you, like I don't know, like having that option to play with it, I think lends something to the experience as well. So
Yeah, definitely.
Witcher's so good.
What a game. Well, bum 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 bum. Zach, you had another thing you wanted to talk about, and I figured we just take stock real quick. If you guys want to keep chatting, or want to stop, because we've been going at this for a bit. I would love to hear what you have to talk about, and I'm willing to continue going. But if you feel like we've covered what you're interested in, we can wrap up now.
Yeah, for sure. I think that we've kind of covered what I wanted to cover about my other point, so I'm good there.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, in that case, we'll probably wrap up then.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you guys for chatting about this. Let's just take a few moments to review kind of what we chatted about today, what we've talked about with open worlds, and what we have learned, if you will. So what have we learned? What comes to mind to carry away from this discussion for you guys?
Man.
I'm looking.
I mean, what we just talked about there with The Witcher, that kind of linked back with what we talked about with Breath of the Wild, of I don't know, that like urgent, like the balance of urgency and storytelling, and like the story like kind of being doled out over time in an open world game. I don't know, so much of that just kind of clicks in my head. Like I'd love to look more into that, as well as the intentional game design and how that plays into it. I think there's just so much more we can look at in that. So I'm glad we discussed that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was really excited about what we kind of got off on when we were talking about Aaron's Cyberpunk experience because
Mm-hmm.
I want to explore that some more, definitely. Like, I think there's something there about making a game in such a way that it encourages you to reflect and look and stop and appreciate what's around you and I think that can be incredibly valuable. In fact, that might be my new favorite thing. I'm gonna be thinking about that for a long time.
Yeah, I feel
Uh,
similarly.
yeah, that's a good one.
With Cyberpunk and Breath of the Wild and Shadow of the Colossus, like and I think there's moments in The Witcher like that too that do a very similar thing. So,
Oh, for sure.
um, like I'm really excited about that idea as well.
Yeah,
These thoughts will be on my mind, and I look forward to discussing them in the future with you guys.
yeah,
Um, yeah. Well, thanks for chatting, and thanks for this discussion. I've enjoyed it tremendously.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been a ton of fun. And thank you, listener people, for listening. Our game highlight this month is Darkest Dungeon, and we'll be playing that. We'll be talking about that next week, actually. So that'll be our game highlight episode. We've all been playing Darkest Dungeon together, and we'll be chatting about our experiences with that. We welcome you to play along with us and to join in the discussion there. Aside from that, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week. This has been Games by Design.
bye.
Bye.